Uh, Hello, Daniel Ellsberg.
Hello,
It's
good morning.
it's a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for making the time actually to talk to me and answer a few questions.
Hmm.
In 1971, with your colleague at the Rand Corporations, you released the Pentagon Papers, which they became known as the Pentagon Papers. Um, I was wondering if WikiLeaks or an organization such as WikiLeaks had existed at the time, how things have been different? Would things have been different, you think?
Yes, they could well have been different. I actually copied the papers in order to give them to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in the first instance, which I did do in '69, almost 2 years before I gave them to the New York Times. And they repeatedly were ready to use them and then backed off two or three times, actually, encouraged me to think they would be about to come out. And I did think that was the best place for them to come out because they could hold hearings and swear in witnesses on oath and confront them with these documents and ask questions. So I thought that was the best channel for raising these issues about history. But they did back off, and I got very discouraged with them. I wasn't really confident the New York Times would ever come out with them because of the classified nature. And I might well have gone, if WikiLeaks had existed, I certainly would have considered giving them to WikiLeaks at that point when I got discouraged with the Senate ever holding hearings. And then when I did give them to the New York Times, Neil Sheehan, for reasons that remain somewhat mysterious, chose not to tell me that they were going ahead with them. And he risked, in other words, my giving them to somebody else at that time. And in fact, I did deal with other senators and with a representative to get them out in Congress. I didn't think any other newspaper was likely to print them at length, which, of course, WikiLeaks would be perfect for doing. If they had existed in digital form, or if we could scan them at that point. At that point, these were all hard copy. So Xeroxing them was a very long process, and you ended up with 7,000 pages of a document. But digitally, of course, that would be nothing. So yes, in terms of waiting for the Times, I would not have waited as long as I did. I didn't think they were coming out at all until the very day that they were going to publish them. So, and I would have said that since. People have asked me that since. What would I urge people to do now? And I still would say that a combination of Congress and the press, not just the press in general, but the New York Times, the Washington Post, one or two of the major national papers, would be probably get the most attention at first. In terms of printing large amounts of material. And I would try those first. But if they delayed, as was often the case, I would then give them to WikiLeaks. Conceivably, you could start with WikiLeaks. People have had some bad luck with other channels being found out. And so, yes, the fact that it does still exist is worthy, I think, is a good thing. I work on a group called the Freedom of the Press Foundation, which I helped to found with John Perry Harlow. And they actually were started in order to channel money to WikiLeaks at a time when, thanks to government influence, nearly all the funding channels had been cut off. I think that's not true now. But we managed to get money to them. So I think that answers your question. The fact that it is there makes it available when the rest of the media back off.
Thanks, Daniel. You were prosecuted with the Espionage Act.
Yes.
When did
I
you?
was the first one. I was
Yeah.
the first one to be prosecuted under that act. We don't have an official secrets act, as Britain does, because our war of independence from Britain resulted in a First Amendment, which they don't have, which forbids Congress to pass any law abridging freedom of speech or freedom of the press or establishing religions. And most countries don't have that with respect to the press, even now. So in theory, there shouldn't be any law which can limit this. The question is the Espionage Act, the way the Supreme Court looks at it, acceptable as an abridgment of free speech in the sense of being narrowly constructed and just for a purpose that Congress endorses, such as, to a very limited degree, libel in this country or obscenity or espionage, for that matter? And the answer is no. It definitely is not a constitutionally acceptable substitute for an Official Secrets Act. And a British type Official Secrets Act, which most countries have, would clearly be unconstitutional, criminalizing any and all release of any classified information, information that the government wants to keep from others, usually from the American public above all, or our allies, and to a small degree from enemies. Very little of it actually requires protection from foreigners. A lot of it requires protection from political rivals in the US, other agencies, or Congress, which controls the budget. So a lot of that information, in other words, must be out, should be out, and is wrongfully held. My trial did not result in either a verdict or an opinion, because governmental crimes were discovered right toward the end, just before it went to the jury, that led to the dismissal of the trial and the charges against me. And really, there wasn't another case for another 10 years or so, and one after that, 3 in all before President Obama. But then President Obama brought about 9 such cases, and Trump did the same in his first term. So there is an increasing use. The use against Julian Assange is the first time that they've used that act against, which is intended for spies, giving secret information secretly to a foreign power, especially an enemy in wartime. And Julian's case is the very first one they've used it against a journalist, as opposed to a source like me, a former official who has possession of the material and shares it with someone. So it's a blatant violation of the First Amendment, and really there wouldn't be much left in this broad, undefined area known as national security, which can cover almost anything that the president chooses. In terms of restricting information, it would essentially be rescinded. Our war of independence would have failed in that respect. And really, the next step would be to use it against people who simply read the material or receive the material, which is in the Espionage Act. Actually, it's written in such a way that it can be used in non-espionage cases such as mine. They didn't charge me with being a spy. It's a non-espionage use. The wording of it can be used against anybody who receives the material. That can be in the media when the source gives it to them, and anybody, by the way, who holds it and possesses it and does not return it to a proper authority. Now, former President Trump is being investigated right now for that violation of the wording of the act, and President Biden is subject to it right now, and they found classified material in his possession. Now, in the case of President Trump, he resisted turning over that material when it was specifically demanded, and is therefore comes more clearly under the act. But just to show the ridiculous breadth of this act with respect in a country that wants to be a democracy or a republic without a monarch who decides everything in the way of information that can be put out, I revealed that I had possessed and had not given it to authorities a top secret document about the Taiwan Straits crisis of 1958, in which we came very close to nuclear war. And I put that out just a year ago through the New York Times, Charlie Savage on the New York Times, who could have been charged just the same way Julian Assange was. And for that matter, anyone at the Times or their readers could have been charged. And I made a point of that just recently to show that how unconstitutional this application of the Act actually is. They didn't question me or do anything about that. So just to make the point a little stronger, I revealed in an interview with the BBC just a month or two ago that I had possessed all of the material that Chelsea Manning had given to Julian Assange before Assange gave it to the newspapers. He conveyed it to me as a backup in case his material was seized in some way or there was a foul up there. And I didn't have to put it out because the newspapers did. But I am therefore as prosecutable by the standards of the Justice Department, with which I disagree. But by their standards, I am as subject to prosecution as any of the people they have prosecuted, or as Julian Assange themselves. And the reason I raised this was that if he's not to be the subject of selective prosecution, which he is actually, but if it isn't to be blatant, they can bring the prosecution against me along with him. And I will certainly not make a plea bargain with the Justice Department. They can't really threaten me, as they have others, with life imprisonment, as they do the other people, which gets them to admit to a lesser charge. Because life imprisonment doesn't mean the same for me as it did 50 years ago when I was charged with it, and I risked that anyway at the time. So we'll try to take this to the Supreme Court and get them at last to rule on this, which they have never done.
Thanks, Daniel. So that'll be my last question. You've recently said, I am Julian Assange, and you've in a way explained this now, but I wanted to ask you, what does the persecution of Julian means to all of us, journalists, citizens?
Even if he were an American citizen, this would be unconstitutional. And it is with respect to him also. That applies to the United States. But actually, to try to extradite an Australian who is in Britain in custody at this time and who gave his information to Le Monde, El País, the British Guardian as well, Der Spiegel in Germany, means that our Justice Department feels justified in trying to extradite any journalist in the world, anywhere, in any newspaper, and conceivably any reader. Yes, we do get into a ridiculous area there. Anyone who holds the information, including holding a newspaper that has acknowledged that they're presenting classified information. And they could do it. Obviously, they're not going to do that to everyone. They can select who they want as a scapegoat for this charge anywhere in the world. So this puts a bullseye on the back of any journalist that has the courage, actually, to print information that the American government does not want told to its own citizens or to its allies or to anyone in the world. The information such as Chelsea Manning revealed through Le Monde, in this case, we've gotten it from Assange, about our knowledge of the corruption of Ben Ali in Tunisia, which everyone knew that Ben Ali was corrupt. They didn't know that the American government fully acknowledged that in their support of him. And that revelation implied that they could resist Ben Ali, as they did, nonviolently, without being assured that the American government would oppose them. It would be embarrassing for the American government to support this man, which they themselves knew was both corrupt and tyrannical. So there was a revelation that didn't affect the U.S. particularly, but did in fact lead to a nonviolent overthrow of a tyrant in Tunisia. And that would certainly be subject to extradition on that point. by the US government if Julian Assange continues to be, the effort continues to extradite him and to prosecute him. No journalist in the world is safe from that, whether they are protected by a First Amendment or not. They're not protected even in the US anymore with this prosecution. Even if it ends, the very fact that it has occurred is as they say, a cooling effect, that is a freezing communication on matters of great public importance. So there's already been a cost. But if public protest can lead to dropping this extradition, as President Biden should do yesterday, today, tomorrow, that will at least clear the way for honest investigative journalism.
Huge thanks, Daniel. Many thanks again for taking the time to do this.